Hello.
Hey, good morning.
Is it morning there? No, it's not morning there.
No.
I'm trying something a little different today, perhaps in consideration for the topic that we're intending to discuss. We'll see how well we stick to it, but we do have some intention to our conversation today, that intention being something around quality of life more generally, right? And so, I do most of my writing and best thinking outside. And as you can see behind me, I am outside. I haven't
Nice.
tried doing this before. So I hope this translates well for you and maybe even makes me seem a little more, well, what does it make me seem a little more? You tell me. Is this good?
Perhaps a little more like you.
It is a little more like me, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyhow, today we wanted to talk about quality of life more generally. I tried to do a little bit of writing this morning on it, though I did get up late. I was working at my quality of life by sleeping a little longer. It seems to help. But I thought it might be a good little introduction to some of the stuff I'm thinking about, unless there's another way that you would prefer to start.
I love it when you start and it gives me something to take umbrage against.
Excellent. Well, prepare to take umbrage. I don't think there's anything too contentious here, but I think that about everything, and I need people in my life to intersubjectively introduce me to ideas that are more true than the ones that exist solely in my head. All right. I was tired this morning, but spirit's still relatively strong. Things have been going better overall with work this week, which has made it easier to do my job. But I need not forget the wake-up call of the preceding 2 weeks. My financial and living situation are much more precarious than I like to act or acknowledge. I need to get serious about making more money and preparing for my own inevitable infirmities. As a society, we here in the West have gotten pretty good at hiding that reality from ourselves. A culture that heralds and celebrates youthfulness as though it can and or should be interminably enduring. An active distaste for senescence, subconsciously assigning a pejorative quality to all things that show aging and subsequent deterioration. Indeed, by definition, deterioration is, quote, the process of becoming progressively worse. And that is precisely what every body does in its senescent years, which begins at a surprisingly early age, relatively speaking. Physically, we each peak in our 20s, and thus the majority of our years, on average, are spent in decline, i.e., worsening. Modern medicine has given us the ability to slow this downhill trajectory significantly, and thus average lifespan has increased tremendously from an average 28 years old during or within the Roman Empire to 80 years in first world societies today. With this impressive extension of life expectancy, what has been largely neglected is the question of quality of life. Living longer is one thing, living well, another entirely. Today, this is where I got interrupted in my writing and said I needed a minute. Today, I hope that we can talk more about this quality of life question that maybe goes overlooked quite a bit today. We like to pretend that we're never going to die, but it comes for all of us. It's the one inevitability in life, I would say, that it will be limited. It will come to an end.
Some people would argue it's what makes life sweet, is that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, there were a few quips that I thought of while you were sharing. And one is, I'm not sure wine or whiskey would agree with you about getting worse with age. And another
yes.
was that the indigenous people in North America really haven't bought into that the old are worthless. So I just want to point that out.
Yes, the attitude toward our elderly varies quite a bit from culture to culture. And I would say that that's one of the things that has changed most dramatically in Western oriented societies. One of the things that came up in a book that I've been reading that you said you've read as well is Being Mortal. One of the things that came up in here was an observation. Oh, there it is. We both got it. It's great. Great book. One of the things that came up in here, they just pointed out that census takers observed that years ago, I forget where the delineation line was, people used to add to their age because it was highly venerated to be older in society. And today, and for quite some time now, what census takers have observed is the proclivity in the opposite direction to tell people that we're younger than we are. So that's a pretty significant marker for a change in attitude toward aging in general and our elderly. I think another point that came up in this book is that.
Wait, okay, we have to talk about one point at a time. We can't stack them.
Okay, fair enough.
It just reminds me of my grandma Elmer was a very prideful woman. She was born in the late 1800s, I think in the 1880s, and she lied about her age being younger than she was for so many years, and on even her driver's licenses and so forth, that when she died and my mom was trying to do the final paperwork and so forth, or being at the hospital with it, they're like, how old is she? And my mom goes, I don't know. I don't know how old she is, because she'd managed to whittle off, I think, 7 years by the time she died. But she started doing that in the 1940s, 1935.
You said she was born in the 1800s?
Yeah, and I'd have to get her birth certificate to see. She died in 1977.
So how long did she live approximately, since we don't know her?
How long did she live? I think she was in her 80s somewhere. She was actually in her 80s. Didn't make it.
I suppose in the 1800s you didn't get a birth certificate.
Oh, no, they did. They kept birth records and stuff. And I've got that somewhere, and I have her actual birthday written down. But I'm just saying, it's not just in the last 50 years that people have been doing that. I'm suggesting that she was not the only person in the 1930s trying to be younger.
And certainly we would find a bunch of variations from person to person, and perhaps from sex to sex, culture to culture.
Yeah. But there was a big, during the Civil War in the 1860s, men especially, or boys, were adding years to their age so they could fight in the Civil War. So they could be drummers in the Civil War. So they wanted to join the fight. And there's instances of that in World War I, World War II. Yeah. Yeah,
I was about to say it certainly continued through World War II. I was reading something recently. There were many 15, 16-year-old boys that lied about their age to go off to war, right? Maybe quite younger than that even, which is...
I think the youngest one in the Civil War of record was 13.
Wow. Well, I could see in the Civil War, where the war was in our home country, that it may have just been entirely unavoidable for any able-bodied male in particular to get swept up in the fight. It was coming through people's yards and homes.
Well, and that was really before, and this is a whole different topic we shouldn't get lost in, but that was really before the invention of childhood as we know it today. You know, childhood didn't exist until after the 1900s.
Let's get swept up in that for a moment, because I
haven't researched that. All my notes are on something else.
Okay, fair enough. But it's a really interesting thing that I haven't spent very much time with. I just never thought about it so directly. But something has shifted profoundly. This notion of childhood and what life should be as a child and what it should become when we become an adult. And we have this artificial line we've drawn somewhere between 18 and 21 here in the West.
What I would say is that it follows the progression of the people in a lower position, wanting and admiring what the powerful have. Sometimes that's money, sometimes that's looks, sometimes that's names. So just follow the trend of names. And I think we can say it's been a patriarchy for a long time.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it's that way now. I'm saying that there's a trend of that. So you'll see in the names, a lot of names that were male, like Francis, Fayette, Shannon, other names have become women's names. There's a trend for the powerful names to be claimed by the unpowerful people. But you don't see it going back the other way, where a lot of men are first names of Rose or Mary. You don't see that trend
Right.
back the other way. And that's actually where tanning came from. The people that had leisure were able to be out in the sun more, and they were the wealthy on the yachts and so forth in the 19th century. And so then everybody was like, oh, tan, because the tanning used to be bad. It used to be better to be lily white because it was the workers that were out in the sun that didn't have as much.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pendulum swung back. So childhood for the wealthy didn't have as many responsibilities. You just saw the wealthy kids with a nanny or with somebody that had free time, could learn how to do falconry, was horseback riding, had this leisure time to read and study and write and quilt and do needlepoint. And so then the lower classes wanted that kind of childhood too, that carefree time for exploration childhood. Anyway, back in the day, the average person, when they were a kid, they were helping, not just with chores. They might be out having a job at 8, helping feed the
Well,
family.
I would say, and I think it showed up in this book as well. Did we say the name Being Mortal? Can you say the name of that author? I don't know.
Not with confidence. What I would say is that book dealt with end of life issues, but they were really all life issues. When I read it, I was at a time in my life where I had to deal with parents becoming elderly. As you stated, soon we're all going to need to face these ideas at some point.
It comes for all of us.
And you were talking about our culture as we know it in the West really idolizes youth. And I would say it also values safety over quality of life. And it also, as you alluded to, values longevity over quality of life.
Yes, that's precisely one of my notes here was the emphasis today, as demonstrated by actions taken, is on longevity of life without enough true consideration for quality of life. Certainly, quality of life should be higher priority than longevity. And yet the vast majority of interventions on behalf of life are more oriented around longevity. Is that a fair statement to make?
I think so. And I think the place that it's easiest to see is with cancer. When somebody has cancer and they are doing chemotherapy and they're also doing radiation, and maybe they're also taking that pill you have to take for 5 years every day. They're doing all these
Yes.
things. And when I had cancer, I wasn't doing chemotherapy and I wasn't doing the pill. I was just doing the radiation. So not the trifecta, just one of them. And it seriously affected my life. I fell asleep while driving because of after weeks and weeks of radiation, just luckily the car was stopped on Highway
Wow.
36 under construction. So luckily the car was stopped, but I just was out and they let all the cars go through. And finally this Caltrans worker, I think he came over expecting to see a dead body in the car. Comes over, lady. and, and I wake up, I go, oh, can I go through? And he goes, oh no, you've missed it. I just want to make sure you're okay,
Wow.
Embarrassing. But it wasn't the
Birch,
only time. I just kind of was out very affected after extended radiation.
I had no idea that you had cancer. Do you mind me asking more questions about it?
Yeah, because I don't want to put any energy into that. As far as I know, I'm cured, so good enough. Moving on. I'm just saying that radiation treatment that I had affected the quality of my life. Now, turned out great, right? Here I am, things are good, no recurrence, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, that was definitely worth it. Some people are going through, like my brother, when he had Parkinson's at the end of life, he was going through chemotherapy for lung cancer because he'd been a lifetime smoker of both cigarettes and cigars. And
Now, why would you bring that up?
I have no idea. But anyway, he was such a great guy and we wanted him around so much. The decisions that were made were to prolong his life. And part of that was treating the lung cancer with chemo or radiation or whatever they were doing. And, I think at that point, it's not improving the quality of life because he'd just be wiped out, completely wiped out the rest of the day after treatment.
Yeah.
In some instances, when he was dehydrated and he'd get chemo, it would perk him up for a few hours because he was all of a sudden hydrated. That was good. But then there'd be a crash afterwards. So, yeah. In Being Mortal, there was a guy that said it was enough for him as long as he could watch football and eat cake. That's was his line in the sand in terms of like pulling the plug or whatever. I thought, well, that wouldn't do it for me. We're all such individuals. That just wouldn't do it.
It seems like a rather low bar. That was one of the questions I was going to try to segue into today, too. The question of what makes life worth living. I don't think most of us are very deliberate about asking ourselves this question through the majority of our life, the healthier years, really trying to discern for ourselves, hey, what is actually meaningful to me about my existence? And what is that lowest bar for me that needs to be maintained for me to feel like life is worth living? Because certainly, I would say, most likely, without exception, every person would encounter a certain bar where they would just say, it's just not worth it. The suffering outweighs any potential positive.
I just think we need to check our prejudices at the door. And I'm guilty of this too. I said watching football and eating cake, that wouldn't make it for me.
Sure.
But what you said was that's a really low bar. Maybe that's a high bar for that guy over there.
Sure.
Maybe that, I'm not in charge of what brings him quality of life. That's great if that works for him. So maybe it's a sidebar.
That's a very good point. I do firmly believe that it's something that needs to be decided uniquely by each one of us for ourselves. That it shouldn't be me projecting my values onto someone else to determine whether their life is worth living or not. I hope I didn't come across that way because I want each person to be able to decide for themselves. Hey, what makes my life worth living?
Yeah, I'm just picky about how things are said. In the comments of the last episode, Red 56 Dragon 61 made that comment about victim mentality. And I wondered if there were people or pets in his life or a belief of a higher power or a passion of some sort that he wanted to finish that really helped him through the challenges he had to face so he could have the quality of life he wanted. It seems like those were the three things I kind of came up with that maybe helped him through whatever to get where he wanted to be.
Just to bring a little more context to that, I believe what was being addressed, he was largely agreeing with a short that we had posted on our channel where I said something to the effect of life happens to all of us. We don't have any ultimate control over what happens to us, but we do have control of our responses. And we have to be very deliberate about choosing the responses that are going to serve us best. It was an inspiring note from him. I would have liked to have heard more. I feel very lucky myself for not having had to contend with the kind of challenges he was describing in his own life. And I just find it inspiring to hear stories like that, stories from Shiloh Harris that you met and talked about in that same episode, The Meaning of Life. I draw so much inspiration. I need that reminder from people who have obviously been dealt a much worse hand, at least at certain points in their life. And they've chosen They've chosen to look for the good, to build something from it. I don't know that there's anything else we ever really can do.
Yeah.
Life's going to happen. It's going to be hard at times. And we just have a choice. What are we going to do with it?
Okay. This is like nothing compared to Red 56, Dragon 61. This is nothing compared to his life or Mr. Harris's life. I mean, this is so mundane. But there was a computer tech guy that was supposed to be here 2 Mondays ago and planned my whole day, calls at the last minute, doesn't come. So he's supposed to come this last Monday. All right, plan my whole day around it. He doesn't come. So then he's supposed to be here this morning. And I think I bordered on the BITCH word when I spoke to him on the phone when he canceled last Monday. I said, I actually enjoy doing other things besides sitting at home waiting for you. If when you say you're going to be here, if you could be here, that would be so helpful to me. Anyway, so I said, I got this thing I'm doing today. Could you please be here at 8 o'clock? The answer then was yes. And there was no call to cancel. And so I spent like 8 to 8:15. Where is, stewing. And I thought, well, I know this isn't what I want to do with my day. And one of the things I wanted to do was there's some stuff happening right when I turn my computer on. So I wanted my computer to be cold when it got here. And I thought, okay, I can't go to town. I can't leave. I can't use the computer. What am I going to do? And all of a sudden, I got my accounts payable and my accounts receivable caught up. I reconciled a checkbook. I was getting so much done. I had such a productive morning. I was almost giddy with pride that I'd done all these things in the real world. Because I do spend a lot of time virtually, and this shouldn't tickle me as much as it does, but I was just so pleased. I wasn't even mad anymore. By 9:30, I wasn't mad. I was just happy. I thought, I hope he doesn't come for another 15 minutes. I could just finish this. Got a little housework done. And I could have chosen to just been mad. And I'm so glad I didn't make that choice. It would have been an easy choice to make, but I got so much more done the other way.
We all get swept up in that from time to time when our expectations are not met. There's some quote around that expectations being the ultimate source of disappointment.
Well, I'm going to say something more from Being Mortal. This is where he's talking about the wise course of action. It's on page 232 for anyone that cares. Courage is difficult enough. The problem is the wise course is so frequently unclear. For a long while, I thought that this was simply because of uncertainty. When it's hard to know what will happen, it's hard to know what to do. But the challenge, Atul has come to see, is more fundamental than that. One has to decide whether one's fears or one's hopes are what should matter most.
A balance between fear and hope, then? Or
yeah, that's what he was suggesting.
A push and pull between the two. That little piece that I started reading here, I didn't quite finish the end of it. I said something to the same effect. I said, perhaps because there's an inherent fear of death born into all of us to varying degrees, that and an active aversion to acknowledging the inevitability of death. I was referring to this focus on longevity as opposed to quality of life. Fear of death is a very real thing, right?
It used to be stronger for me.
I would say the same for me. Well, yes and no. Sometimes it's very surprising to think back about just how bold we are in our youth. We have no fear of death at all. I'm not going to die ever.
I'm not counting that.
But at some point, that gives way. Most of us become a little bit more wary of what could happen.
Well, we start to have people in our lives die or have accidents, broken necks, broken backs, people in drunk driving accidents. You start to see what can happen. Wise up a little bit.
Do you suppose that the fear of death that has been leaving you, as you said, you're less fearful of it, do you think that that is associated with a certain sense of fulfillment?
Yes. I was just in a vehicle recently where I didn't have control and I wasn't able to change the situation in any way. And I just sat there and thought, okay, well, I've had a good life. I had to have a little talk to myself because at first I was like scared. I thought, this is it, I'm dying. And then I had to have a little talk with myself and say, well, if this was it, man, did I have a good run. Boy, was I lucky. I took a moment to close my eyes and started thinking about people I love, situations I've loved, people that have been there for me throughout my life. And, I took the focus off of the danger and readjusted it over this way so that I wasn't full of fear. Because I think at this point, I'm not as scared of dying as I am as being an invalid. Don't test that. Don't hold me at gunpoint and go on. How you feeling? Scared. I don't want to go. Let me be clear. I am not interested in dying.
That point about being more fearful of becoming an invalid than dying itself, I share that with you. And I think that most people asked outside of immediate circumstances of death, like we are right now, from the comfort of this distance we have from it,
Yes.
we can confidently make that choice. Say, yeah, I am far more fearful of becoming invalid than death itself. And I think that points back to where I was trying to start earlier, this, determining what makes life worth living. Because even the word invalid, is there a clear line for that? There's a lot of haziness, right?
Well, for me, there is. Have you ever seen the show Alaska's Deadliest Waters? And they show these boats and these fishermen out there, and they're just like people with a gusto for life and fighting the elements and just strong and healthy. And one of my dear friends was one of those people up in Alaska. And he was in a car wreck. He became overnight a quadriplegic. He lived for, I think, 7 years after he was a quadriplegic. He said to me, Virginia, this is not good. This is not what I chose. I'm not going to commit suicide because of my belief system. But, the only thing he could do was direct stuff with a straw with his mouth. He was, oh God, he was witty and funny as hell. But once he was a quadriplegic, every 15 minutes, he's got to get his wheelchair in a different position so that he doesn't get sores all over his body. So much of it just becomes maintenance. He would have been a great person to go around and give talks because he had a lot to offer intellectually. But the logistics of getting a wheelchair like that, like onto an airplane to go somewhere, I mean, it just didn't pan out. And he's steering it with his lips, and that there's a learning curve there. And he broke his wife's foot, drove over his wife's foot in the wheelchair.
Oh.
And they're really heavy, and
Yeah.
broke her leg. I can't remember. It was cast up pretty high. And then because she was then injured, her sister came to help. And then he drove over her. And, it was like, it's tough. It was a tough life. And I wasn't there enough for him because it's far away from where I am. But that's my definition of invalid. Yes, he could still get around a bit with his lips. Yes, he could still work a computer a bit, but he didn't have anything down below his neck. He couldn't, like you put your hand on his shoulder, he couldn't feel that.
I don't know. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit on that definition of invalid, because I'm not inclined to agree that that would be an invalid. And I say that from a lot of personal experience, actually. I don't think we've talked about it, but my mother, for the last 20 years of her life or so, maybe longer, it may have been as long as 30 years. I'd have to really think about it. She ended up taking care of a quadriplegic. When she first met him, he was living in a bedroom in his father's house, and he had various caretakers that would come in to essentially keep him alive because he couldn't do anything for himself.
Right.
And My mom showed up needing work at that point in her life, and she started working with him, and they just hit it off. They became the best of friends, and it was so unbelievably good for both of them. Now, the life expectancy for a quadriplegic, I'm sure this, depending on particular circumstances, it varies, but I would say what you described with the person 7 years, that's probably about the best you expect for the survival once somebody is in that state. This man, he met my mom, and they struck up a genuine relationship to the point that I know later on in life, my mom was very uncomfortable because he wanted to marry her, and she didn't feel good about that. But there was no two ways about it. They were best friends, and they started by getting him out of his father's house into an apartment that she lived at with him. She saved up money working for him crazy hours because she was basically 24/7 care. They still would try to have other care workers come around, but finding good help is surprisingly difficult.
Yes.
Anyhow, they managed to save enough money. And I say they because it was definitely a team effort. It was one of the most beautiful relationships I have ever been privy to witness in this life. And I doubt I'll ever see anything better. I have to remember that when I think about my mom, because I struggled in my relationship with her, but she truly did some beautiful things and had a beautiful heart and should be remembered that way. Anyhow, they got out of his father's house. They got an apartment for a few years, saved enough money. They bought a house together. I helped them look for a house for a long time. They finally found one in San Antonio, and he persisted in his life something like 30 years. I want to say it was 30 years. And everybody that came around, all the professionals, the doctors, the nurses, they just couldn't believe it. They said, this is unheard of. Nobody in a state like this man was in lives this long. But the thing is, this is my contention, he found purpose.
Yeah.
He found a reason to persist. And that reason for him was my mom very much needed him. He needed her and she needed him. They just had this beautiful reciprocal relationship. And eventually life caught up with him. He died, and my mother died a year after him. Relatively young, cancer actually. We didn't know about it. I think she knew something about it earlier, but was hiding it from people. So I didn't know, and some of our other family didn't know until it was in the stage 4.
Yeah.
She did go have a surgery to have this tumor from the uteral wall removed. It was this big mass. She had that surgery, had it removed. The doctors told her at that time that she needed to start chemotherapy, that if she did not, she wouldn't live more than 6 months. And she thought about it, and she decided she didn't want to go through that. She didn't want chemotherapy. And I very much believe that after Jim died, that was her best friend, this quadriplegic that she took care of. After he died, she ceased feeling like she was needed in the world. She didn't know where to put her time or energy. She always struggled a bit socially. So she was very much in isolation after he left. I tried to visit her, but not enough, like, most kids. And she just spiraled downward. She was lonely and she didn't have a sense of purpose. And when that diagnosis came, she didn't see any reason to go through all that. She was done. So anyhow, to circle back to where you started, that was a long explanation. But when you defined invalid as quadriplegic, you may not have said it quite like that. I don't mean to put words in your mouth. It's not necessarily the case, right? It comes back to what we both agreed on earlier, that each one of us have to define for ourselves. At what point does life cease to be worth living?
I guess I was saying that was my bar. That was my bar
yes.
because Because the people that I know currently in my life, like my kids or my husband, they're not up for that. And I'm not up for them having me be the center of their life. No, that's not
And
true.
you
No,
don't
that's
want to,
not true. I am up for me being the center of their life,
what I was
but
going to
not
try
my
to offer
physical
you,
needs.
right? You don't want to feel like you're a burden.
Yeah, that phrase is overdone, but I don't want my physical needs to be what their life's about.
It may be cliche, but I think cliches arise for a reason. I very much feel the same way. The idea that I would want to continue living as a burden on my son, no, or anybody else for that matter. Now, that being said, if I'm ever presented with that challenge directly, who knows what it's like to be
That's right. That's
staring
right.
death in the eye, right?
Well, and the other thing is, you just never know who might come into your life. You might come
That's
into
right.
your life, you might come into somebody like your mom who she didn't make Jim feel like he was a burden. She needed
Mm-hmm.
him. He needed her. I mean, that's a real relationship, and that's I think what everybody's looking for is a real relationship.
Yes, yes, I absolutely agree. So for you, I could see, just for argument's sake, a lot of what you do, from my vantage, what seems to make you happy are these kind of interactions, very real, personable relations with people that you care about. I feel safe assuming that you've said it enough to me. You've done a significant amount of research and writing in your life as well. So it strikes me that you found a certain amount of fulfillment in that as well. Those activities alone, we could keep going, but just those two things, they are perfectly attainable as a quadriplegic.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I agree. And also, let's say I had enough money to pay somebody to do my care so loved ones weren't having to. Well, there you go. That'd be better. I'm not looking for that, though. I'm
Yeah,
not looking to
yeah.
become a quadriplegic. Have you seen you don't spend time watching shorts on Instagram,
No,
Facebook, but there's this, oh god, what do they call themselves? I can't remember, but there's a quadriplegic and even there's a there's a guy that has to lay on a gurney and he can just like move his lips and stuff a little bit. And anyway, they're all severely handicapped, and that word passe when applied to these people. But these guys, they do these comedy sketches. Oh my God. And they're so funny. And they're so funny because they throw all the norms for people with these disabilities out the window. And then they were recognized by somebody that recognizes shorts because they have over 1 million views. When they got to their first 1 million views, they were all like, anyway, they're all dressed up in tuxes and they all go to this award ceremony. So, yeah, people make out of their lives what they're going to make out of, regardless. The other thing that touched on that I just want to come back around to was about not just the length of life being more important than the quality of life to some people, but also the safety. For example, if an 85-year-old man is drinking every night in his home, he wants to stay in his home, he wants to have a drink, he wants to have lots of drinks, and he's drinking every night and he falls down, hits his head on the concrete or on the tile, and he bleeds out and dies. Our society has a tendency to say, where were the children? Who was
yeah.
paying attention? Why weren't people taking care of him? When what he wanted to do was be in his house and drink. Why does safety trump quality of life?
Yeah, and it does seem there's a proclivity in our society to point blame somewhere when an accident like that happens, as though the kids in that example did something wrong. I would say autonomy, something we've
Yeah.
discussed previously, is very, very important to, I would say, the vast majority of people, in my experience. Just a sense of control, especially after you've been alive for 80 years and you're autonomy is taken away, that sounds absolutely dreadful to me. There was some discussion again of that in Being Mortal, that essentially when people are put into nursing homes, their entire life becomes regimented. They're with another group of people there, and they're all herded around on a tight schedule. We eat at such and such a time. We take our drugs at such and such a time. We have this activity next. It's all institutionalized. It's very much what you would expect if you were in prison.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a life worth living to me. And the little bit of experience I've had walking into nursing homes has been horrifying to me in exactly the same regard, that the people there, they end up in a zombie type state where they are technically, maybe they're kept physically safer, like you were saying, this emphasis on safety. But safety to what end? We're extending life for the sake of what?
Well, and then that gets back to what he was saying about the balance between fear and hope, that they're not valuing hope, like what they hope their life will be. Their emphasis is on fear of death.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's
Yeah.
worth giving up their autonomy. I think sometimes they don't make the choice. Sometimes they make the choice because their kids are saying, do this, or their spouse is saying, do this.
Yeah, unfortunately, well, there's a bunch of different aspects at once, and this was going to come out wrong. We live much longer now on average than we once did. I thought that was a really interesting note that I wrote in that first entry for my journal here that I ran into. I think in Being Mortal or a similar book, that in ancient Rome, the average lifespan was 28 years.
Okay,
And now
wait. Now, the math teacher in me wants to say there are a lot of bottlenecks in health. And so even in the early 1800s, life expectancy wasn't quite so long.
Mhm.
But if you lived through childhood and if you lived through the war, then there were quite some older people around. There were 80, 90-year-old and, well, according to the Bible, 600-year-old people
Sure.
around in the past.
Yes.
Just because the average was 28 doesn't mean most of the people were 28. Because
Yes.
those childhood deaths and the infant mortality and taking the mom with them when they died, that really brought down the...
Where I was going is that with average lifespan being so much longer today than it once was, there's a weight on society to manage a large elderly population that wasn't the case hundreds of years ago. There were some people that lived for a very long time, but not nearly as many as today. And then that problem is compounded by, people refer to it as the birth gap today in the West, that people just aren't inclined to have children the way they used to be. Many women don't have any interest in becoming a mother. That's fine. I'm not trying to express an opinion on that. I'm just saying, at a societal level, what we have is this inversion in the balance between elderly and the young. I wish I remember the exact statistics. They were definitely in Being Mortal as well, about once upon a time, you had a larger group of youth as opposed to the elderly. And so caring for elders was a lot easier at a societal level, that it could be managed even within the framework of one family. If you imagine families on average, I think even through the 1800s, I think the average was as many as 7 children. And today, I think the average is like 1.5.
And I do want to point out that inverse is co-varies with education level. It's the more education, the less likely to reproduce. So people that don't finish high school are more likely to have more births than people
Yes.
that have a career or go to college.
And that creates this tension between this educated, or more educated ruling class with fewer children, and the less educated working class with more children. Certainly, we see that tension playing out throughout the world.
Between the rich and the poor, yes.
Well,
because kids cost money.
but to add to that, so maybe a rich, educated minority as opposed to the larger, uneducated poor.
Well, we're going to get into some real weeds here if we're not careful.
Isn't that what we do?
Well, yeah. Because the way I'm not up to date on what used to be called welfare or public assistance, and the way that we as the United States have funded poverty so that we'll give money to homes that don't have males in them, and we'll give money based on the children, where we give more money for more children. Those laws created some of what we see now, and I never believed any of that welfare mother smack that people used to toss around until I met some that when their oldest child got to be 17, they had another baby. They got pregnant because otherwise they wouldn't have any more money coming in.
Mm-hmm.
When that happened, I was just like, what? That's real?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Then we get into the politics, all that, and poverty, and I can't solve that. So best to stay away from it.
Are you familiar with the Pareto principle? The 80-20 rule?
No.
The other way it's put. Supposedly, universally, we see this principle play out. So 80% versus 20%, not just in discussions of an economy or the wealth of a population, but even to the point of 80% of the light comes from 20% of the stars. And that basic ratio seems to hold true across everything. So when we look at the productivity of a society, 80% of productivity comes from 20% of the people. When we look at the wealth of a society, 80% of the wealth goes to 20% of that society, and on and on and on.
No, the theory that I have written on my board here is the law of resonance. The universe reflects back to you what you are.
Where did you get this law of resonance?
I have no idea.
Okay.
When I asked you about it, I had to Google it to get that definition, but that's the definition. The universe reflects back to you what you are. But there were no numbers attached, no 80-20.
It sounds about right to me. It's just another version of that a nice nin quote again.
Yeah.
We don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are.
That's right. And just in case it came up today, I also wrote down the definition when Googled of consciousness, because it seems like we always have trouble defining everything. And
I'm not for a second going to take Google's definition of consciousness.
Well, I like this one. The subjective internal reality of what it is like to be you.
The subjective internal reality of what it is like to be you.
Or I suppose we could change the pronoun to me. So my consciousness is the subjective internal reality of what it's like to be me. I rather like that.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Outside of a broader discussion of consciousness where I've really gone down a few wormholes, that sounds just fine. But I'm sure if we went barreling into consciousness again, I'd have all kinds of issues that always crop up because it's just paradox after paradox when you're talking about consciousness, which is why I love it.
Yeah, me too. It's one of the things that makes the quality of life so fun, is to talk about things like that.
The questions, the unanswerable questions are what make life worth living. What do you think about that? We just circle right back around to this question of, hey, at what point does my life cease to be worth living? Perhaps if I had all the answers, I think for me personally, you give me all the answers, I'd be like, oh, all right, I'm done. I'm out.
You know what? I like people and dogs, I think, too much. I could still stick around to love people and to love dogs.
Could you love them if there was no question of what was going to happen with them, though? So if you were this omniscient...
Well, first of all, we know there is no danger of that.
Oh, I'm certainly getting close. I'm pretty close to omniscience. I'm surprised you hadn't noticed. I got all the answers over here. No, but when I suppose that life would cease to be worth living if I knew everything, that would include everything that's gonna happen. It's the mystery, the unanswered questions, and the not knowing, just the surprise of it all. If you can't be curious about, if you don't have a curiosity and appreciation for the unknowable, life has just got to be dreadful.
Well, it would be dreadful for you or I. I
Okay.
think the guy that likes football and cake, he still likes football and cake.
But he only likes football because he doesn't know how the game's going to end. He doesn't know what's going to happen. Well, I suppose some guys watch the same game over and over, right? They'll record it, so they know how it's going to go, and they still love it. So, yeah, apparently I'm not omniscient yet, but I'm getting closer. I'm sure of it.
I'm going to save you from further discussion here and read a quote from page 173 from Being Mortal.
Okay.
When there's no way of knowing exactly how much time is left, and we imagine ourselves to have much more time than we do, our every impulse is to fight, to die with chemo in our veins or a tube in our throats or fresh sutures in our flesh. The fact that we may be shortening or worsening the time we have left hardly seems to register. We imagine that we can wait until the doctors tell us there is nothing more they can do, but rarely is there nothing more they can do.
No, I would say that the way the system is structured, they're always expected to do something. Like people, what do you call that? Doctor shopping. So somebody doesn't like what a doctor says, they just go to the next one until they get something of what they want. And every doctor knows that. So to retain your clients, you have to give them something. As a doctor, you might know there's nothing to be done here, but the whole system, it's like they're expected to come up with something.
And the push to avoid death pushes people to go to other countries to get medicine, pushes people into the hands of charlatans that promise things that can't be. And there's a lot of charlatans, and they might be big corporations in America pushing stuff that cracks me up. They'll be pushing some pill, some jar of something, and then at the bottom of the screen on the TV commercial, there's a disclaimer, this has not been proven to do anything. But people are desperate to escape death.
To play devil's advocate a little bit on that, because I do completely agree with your overall sentiment on what you shared there, I believe. But I also believe that perhaps, one of the most essential ingredients to life is hope and or this belief that you can. If somebody can give someone hope where they don't otherwise have it, and sometimes that might be portrayed as wrong, but there's plenty of research around psychogenics to demonstrate that, people surprise us all the time. If they believe they can conquer something, if they believe that they can get through a disease, they do. When everybody said it wasn't possible, somehow they managed to hold on to hope and fight through and do it. Psychogenics are a very real thing. The opposite is true too. We get bad diagnosis from doctors. We get told we're going to die. We believe it and we die. And then autopsies will often reveal that, maybe often is too much there, but there are certainly plenty of documented cases of people dying from diseases they did not have simply because they believed they had it and they lost hope.
In the early 80s, I used to go visit this gal at assisted living situation or nursing home, whatever it was. I don't know how I even got hooked up with her because, like, I didn't know her from outside of that. I just started going to visit her. She was confined to her bed, and they could put her in a wheelchair. I think everything worked, but not well. Like, arms and appendages worked, but no strength. They'd atrophied. And she would lay in bed, but every week she bought a lottery ticket. It was when the California lottery started. Every week she'd buy a lottery ticket, and I'd go and she'd say, "Oh, I got a lottery ticket." And I said, at first, my mom was really against the lottery. So I just took those beliefs right with me. And I was like, "Why would you do that? Don't waste your money, blah, blah, blah. Let me explain the math to you." And she said, "No, no, no, no. Let me tell you what I'm going to do when I win the lottery." I said, "Oh, tell me." And she told me about the house she was going to build and all the modifications that were going to be in the house and the people that she was going to hire to work for her and what she was going to be able to do with her life once she lived in this place. I mean, she had created a whole nother universe of hope. And I thought, for $1 a week, this too could be yours. What a deal. What a deal.
Yeah. How could you spend $1 a week better?
Yeah, that's really what I came to believe. So, yeah.
Okay, so I need to start buying lottery tickets, apparently. That's the moral of the
No, I
story.
still believe in the math, so it doesn't do it for me. But for her, it worked. Just that hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hope makes all the difference. You have to believe that there's something to dream about. Generally speaking, when we get what we're dreaming of, it's never as good as the dream itself, right?
My mom used to say the best part of any vacation is the planning and thinking about it ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree with your mom's sentiment, but that particular example, oh God, I hate planning out. I never plan out my trips at all. I don't want an itinerary. I don't want, just like get me a ticket last minute, send me somewhere and let what happens happens. I just don't do good with structure. That's part of why nursing homes are so dreadful to me. It's such a regimented existence.
I don't think it's that you don't like structure, even though you just told me that's what it is. You just love not knowing. You love the mystery of the unknown more than you hate structure, I think.
Or at least I claim to. It's funny. As long as what happens falls into my little world of likes, I'm good. But when the not knowing introduces things that are not so pleasant, then I don't feel so good about it anymore. Something of the human condition, right?
Yeah. I just thought I should mention Emily Dickinson's poem, "Hope is the thing with feathers, the perches on the soul."
Do you have the whole poem in front of you?
No.
Well, I am not familiar with that poem, but I have been trying to dip into poetry more regularly of late. I slowly started getting into poetry over the last 5, 6 years, 8 years. It's never quite come natural to me, but I found that the more I indulge it, the better my outlook on life becomes.
Well, I'll put the full poem in the show notes.
Okay. All right.
I loved poetry as a child because I was a very poor reader. And generally, poems are very short. And so they were very accessible to me as a non-reader as opposed to something longer.
Yeah. It's kind of funny to me that I took so long to find poetry. It seems like it should be much more natural to me than it's largely been. I really appreciate it. My tendency with written word in general is to struggle with meaning word by word and line by line. It takes me a long time to get through a book because I really want to understand what's being said. And so I end up reading the same little pieces over and over, trying to go, wait, did I get that? And essentially, I think that's what has to be done with poetry, that the meaning in poetry is between the lines, that you really have to immerse yourself in it. No?
I think it's just like everything else. The meaning of poetry is what we bring to it and project onto it from whatever's
Oh, of
happening in
course.
our life right then. Poetry's so easy to project onto because there's so much between the lines that you can.
Yes. How would you like to hear a poem?
You got one there?
Well, one of the things I started pushing myself to do just in this last year is not only spend a little more time with poetry, but to start committing some to memory. That it's actually really good for us as we're getting older to be very deliberate about exercising our mind in that way, memorizing things. It's supposed to help a lot. I feel like it helps me in my writing a lot. If I'm memorizing things, I find a fluidity that lately I seem to just struggle even speaking. Words always escape me. So I'm always trying to do something about that. And memorizing things seems to help a little bit.
There's a real pull away in American education not to have kids memorize poems anymore, or memorize the Gettysburg Address, or memorize different things because they're so accessible and you can look it up on the internet. And really, what you're saying is true and is proven by brain science is that you have kids memorizing poems, and what they're doing is they're exercising that portion of their brain that memorizes stuff. It doesn't matter what they're memorizing. Then future memorizations and future endeavors with that portion of the brain are more successful. As we get older, if we're memorizing things, that's one thing we can do. More importantly, there's a fluidity piece about pivoting.
About pivoting?
Yeah, being able to concentrate on that and switch attention to that.
The ability to do that is associated with memorization?
No, with a healthy older brain. I just wanted to
Oh,
be clear that just memorizing crap doesn't help. That in and of itself and alone doesn't hold off dementia or anything, but it does make the brain stronger.
for me, that's an area of concern for the way our children are being taught now. So it's not just something significant to a brain as it gets older. You know, with my son being in junior high now and witnessing some of the things that teachers are starting to say about a lack of necessity to memorize things like you mentioned. I don't think I ever knew the Gettysburg Address. Did we do that in fifth grade?
That would be fifth grade, and I memorized it in my fifth grade class. I just still know most of it now.
Well, perhaps I knew it back then and I just lost it along the way. I did
Well,
a
if you're not
lot
pulling it
of,
out at cocktail parties, you got to refresh every so often.
it's true. But
I
there
can
is, it
also
does
do the
seem,
preamble.
yeah. Do you have it ready?
I've memorized them like you've memorized your poem. People don't want to hear that crap. Let's hear your poem.
Well, I never recite my poems for people. When I write in the mornings, I'll often read little bits of poetry for a little bit of inspiration. And then the ones I've committed to memory, sometimes I'll walk around out here in the backyard like crazy old man reciting poetry to myself. But you know what? It brings meaning to my life to do so.
Yeah. On the last episode, you talked about altruism, and I actually have a poem that I wrote about altruism in the late 1970s, and it goes something like this. So altruism dies at last, and what do we have to show? Broken hearts and bodies worn, ourselves the only foe.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know if it's nice or not, but I memorized it. It's in a little book that was published.
That's great. I'll take a shot at reciting a poem from Rilke. Is that how you pronounce his name? Rainier Maria Rilke, Rilke. It was a German name, 1800s. Are you familiar with him?
No, but what you just said made me want to say that brings meaning and interest to my quality of life. Having to do something a little scary. Remember when we used to say, take a risk?
Yes.
Putting yourself out there a little bit. I think that's part of the quality of life is still having opportunities where we can fail. People could make fun of us or things could go wrong. Putting ourselves out there is such a great thing for us to do. So yes, I am dying to hear this Rilke poem.
This particular poem was something I discovered in the year preceding my mother's death as she was in her final moments. It felt like she was waiting for permission, that I needed to say something. Such a big moment. What do you say? I desperately wanted to share something that would make her happy and peaceful. And for her, she was very steadfast in her Christian beliefs. And I spent quite a bit of time thumbing through one of her Bibles at her bedside over the last couple days before she passed, trying to find something I could read to her from the Bible that would really resonate with her and show her that I was making an effort to really be there with her and for her and just help her peacefully make the transition. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that the best thing I could do was to give her something of myself. She didn't need to hear me read from her Bible. She needed to hear from her son. The preceding 2 years had been especially difficult for me for a number of reasons, and I discovered some of Rilke's poetry and this particular poem that really helped me with the depression that has been a battle for me off and on throughout my life. This particular poem, I believe it's titled Gravity's Law, was the last thing I said to my mother before she passed on. So it's very vivid in my mind. She was in her own bed. She wasn't feeling a lot, but she was definitely present at the last moment. I remember her looking at me and letting go, letting her last breath out. I don't know if you have any similar stories you might want to recount before I close us out with Gravity's Law.
Well, my story is similar and different because that's how stories are. I held my mom as she died, and I was singing to her. She didn't look at me like, it seems like you're clear when she died. I wasn't sure when she has died, so I just started singing other songs. The nurse walked in and walked through and then walked out, and then the nurse walked back in and said, I think she's gone. So, because, you don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to go, oh, she's gone, and then set her down like right before she goes. And oh, God, she's thrown me on the bed. So better to err on holding a dead body in your arms than not. The song I think she went out on is Let There Be Peace on Earth. She always liked that song.
You erred on the correct side. Hold her too long as opposed to not long enough. Yes.
That's right.
Well, should we take a stab at Gravity's Law?
Yes, please. Gravity's Law.
All right. How surely gravity's law, strong as an ocean current, takes hold of even the smallest thing. Each blossom, stone, child is held in place. Only we, in our arrogance, push out beyond what we each belong to for some empty freedom. If we surrendered to Earth's intelligence, we could rise up rooted like trees. Instead, we entangle ourselves in knots of our own making and struggle, lonely and confused. So, like children, we begin again to learn from the things because they are in God's heart. They have never left him. This is what the things can teach us: to fall, patiently to trust our heaviness. Even a bird has to do that before he can fly. There it is.